I'm here to introduce Ian Underwood. Ian Underwood is a man of many hats. Planetary scientist, artificial intelligence researcher for NASA, treasurer of the economics, ethics, and economics education of New England, and a board member of the Foundation for New Hampshire Independence, and Ian Underwood from Croydon, New Hampshire.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for coming. So my wife Jody and I have a lot of conversations about public schools, talking about what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, how they should be funded, and how they shouldn't be funded. And so one of these times we were talking, she said, hey, you know what? You like taking the opposite side of any argument, so why don't you take it here? Why don't you figure out what is whether there's a libertarian case for public schools? And so I took that as a challenge, and I thought about it, made some notes, thought about it, and I've come to the conclusion that the answer is no. I think we have time for questions. But suppose we ask this a different way, okay? So suppose we ask it, is there a libertarian case for using taxes to assist people in becoming educated? And so when we ask it this way, there are a couple of differences from the normal way of thinking about it. One is that it acknowledges that schools are only one of many ways to become educated. And the idea that, which we seem to have developed as a society, that the only way to become educated is to go to school is sort of like saying the only place you can catch a fish is in a lake. So also this talks about assisting people, which is different than the normal rhetoric, which usually has to do with we have to provide people with an education, we have to give them an education. And typically we only assist people who need it, like if they need heating oil, they need housing allowances. The people who can afford what they need, they buy it. The people who can't, we give them some assistance. And so when we ask the question this way, we get a different answer, which is, because there's still this whole tax thing, right? And becoming educated is just way too open-ended. We're going to support people through multiple PhDs. So let's try it again. And we can ask it, given that the money is going to be taken and spent anyway, is there a libertarian palatable way to use taxes to avoid the dangers of an uneducated populace? Now, there are a couple of changes here. One is palatable. I don't mean you have to like it. I mean you can hold your nose and swallow it. And note that the emphasis changed now. It used to be about what we would like to get, and now it's about something we'd like to avoid, which turns out to be, I think, a critical change. And when we make this change and ask the question this way, we get a different answer, which is, it depends. Well, it depends on what? Well, it depends on whether we use the right words to ask the right questions, and that's really what I'll be talking about today. So there are three things that I believe that sort of form the core of my philosophy, I think. One of them is I agree with Confucius that the first step towards wisdom is to call things by their right names. And I'd like to illustrate this with what research has actually proved is the world's funniest joke. So, two guys go hunting, one of them falls to the ground, he's clutching his chest, his eyes are glassy, he doesn't seem to be breathing. His friend whips out his cell phone, calls 911, says, help, I think my friend is dead, I don't know what to do. And the operator says, well, first stay calm, I can help you. Let's make sure that he's actually dead. And there's a pause and a gunshot. And the guy picks up the phone and says, okay, now what? Okay, so these are people who do not use the right words to describe their situation. So a second thing I strongly believe is I agree with Charles Kettering that a problem well posed is half solved. And this is also illustrated by a story. So there was a village, Eastern Europe, somewhere in Eastern Europe, and there was a disease that was coming through the village. And the symptoms of the disease are basically that you appeared to be dead. You couldn't tell whether you were alive or not. You couldn't detect breathing, couldn't detect a heartbeat. And so people were freaked out because they're like, what if we bury him and he wakes up? That's going to be horrible. And so they were thinking about all these very complicated solutions for, we could put an air tube down with every coffin, and we could have a bell so they could ring it, maybe food and water, and maybe we'd have people sit outside the grave, but how long would they have to sit for? And the undertaker for the town said, well, there's a much easier solution. We just put a big stake on every coffin, and when they close it, it goes right through their heart. And everybody's looking at him going like, no, we're trying to figure out how do we avoid burying anybody who's still alive. And he's like, oh, I'm trying to figure out how do we make sure everybody we bury is dead. Okay? So the way you phrase the problem leads you in different directions for solutions. So the third thing that I really strongly believe is you have to know why you're cutting off the end of the roast. I couldn't find a fancy quote for this. But this is a joke that I really love, and I think it explains about 35% of politics. So a guy, he's looking at his wife, she's making a roast in the kitchen. Maybe his wife looking at the husband, I don't care. Anyway, she cuts off the end of the roast, throws it away. And he's like, why are you doing that? And she's like, well, that's how my mom did it. He said, well, why'd she do it that way? She said, I don't know. Let's call her up. So they call her up. And they ask the mom, well, why did you cut the end off the roast? And she says, I don't know. That's how my mom did it. So they said, well, let's call your mom. So they call her up. Hey, Grandma, why did you cut the end off the roast? And she said, well, when I first got married, my roaster was too small. So you have this family through generations essentially carrying out the solution to a problem that doesn't actually exist, which, as I said, explains a huge amount, I think, of politics. So one of the reasons I wanted to give this talk is I am very frustrated by what I see as the sort of level of discourse about public schools and about education in general, which often seems to be some version of this, where somebody makes some mild recommendation and the other person responds with something verging on hysteria. So George Orwell, in his book 1984, posited the existence of something called newspeak, where the government radically reduced the vocabulary that people could use. So, this is essentially the kind of discussions they could have, and it made it impossible to have certain discussions and actually impossible to even conceive certain thoughts. Now, what's funny is he had a government imposing this, and what's frustrating to me is we seem to be doing it to ourselves by reducing the number of words to use the same set of words to describe lots of things that are actually very different, and this makes it hard to have reasonable conversations. So, for example, we have two people here essentially using the same words in the same order, right? We should make sure every child gets an education. So they agree, right? Not so much. So she's thinking, when she's thinking we, she means the government, and he means individuals, acting individually, okay? When she says make sure, she means let's provide it to everybody, whether they need it or not. We'll make it free, we'll make it subsidized. And he's thinking, well, people can buy what they need, just should buy it, and people can't, maybe we could help them out. So even the word should, they're not agreeing on, in the sense that her motivation is she has this idea where every child has the right to reach his full potential and to flourish, and that we should be treating them like these wonderful flowers and doing everything he can, whereas he's taking a more defensive view of this and basically saying, we can't really afford to be surrounded by idiots. Okay, so almost literally every word that they are using, they're the same words, but they mean completely different things. So there's a thing that a lot of people probably heard of called the tragedy of the commons. Everybody knows this already. So Garrett Hardin coined this term to describe what happens when you have resources where nobody owns them and they get totally overused. I would like to introduce an idea that's related and more important here, and it's more linguistic in nature. And I call it the travesty of the umbrella. And so what I mean by that is, let's imagine there's some good or service, and we'll just call it X because we don't know what it is, and it's subsidized. And that means a lot of people are getting it for free or at a screaming discount. And some of those people might think, well, God, it's nice that they're giving me X, but I'd like to get Y too. So if I could stretch the definition of X so it includes Y, I'll get that too, okay? So just to give an example, let's suppose X is healthcare. Okay, and so how might this work? Well, somebody might argue, well, food is medicine, right? I mean, I heard some ancient Greek guy said that. So food, if I'm starving, a doctor can't cure me of anything. So really, food should be subsidized under healthcare. And, I have to be able to get to the doctor, or else having health insurance doesn't matter. So really, transportation should be covered. And while I'm at the doctor, I need somebody to take care of my kids because I can't just drag them to the doctor's office with me. And what if I need help getting dressed? I can't get my buttons buttoned. Without occupational therapy, I might have to go to the doctor naked, which really isn't going to be good for anybody. Oops. And if I have issues at home, maybe there's stuff going on in my house and I can't really talk openly to my doctor, or he gives me, treatments and I don't feel comfortable dealing with those at home, then you know what? In order to access healthcare properly, I might need to have a social worker to help me. So all this stuff really should be part of healthcare, shouldn't it? And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, this is nuts, because who would do this, right? And it turns out, we already do it. This is how school works. School refers to all these things, okay? Except that's an understatement. It actually refers to a lot more things. It's a much bigger umbrella than people seem to actually realize. And I had an experience, I think it was a year ago at our town meeting, where I just point blank asked our principal and our special ed coordinator if they could name something where they could allocate money and they wouldn't be able to call it education, and neither one of them could come up with anything. So I thought that was pretty telling. So I think this is a big part of the problem. The question then is, well, what can we do about it? So people like to invoke constitutions when they talk about issues, including this issue. So you hear people talking about how, oh my God, we're not allowed to give money to religious schools, or we're forbidden to do this, or somewhere in Article 83 it promises people a free and appropriate education. And the point is, we're just way past the point where anybody pays attention to the Constitution as a set of constraints. So you can't really cite the Constitution and expect anybody to take it seriously. However, especially given some of the things that judges say. Oh, by the way, that's a great quote. If you've never heard this, this is a Supreme Court justice in the United States who basically said, yeah, we're under a Constitution, but it's whatever we say it is. And the thing is, they say some pretty whack stuff. So, for instance, this guy was a judge in the Croydon case, and part of his ruling essentially said, yeah, where a statute says something is including but not limited to X? Well, that actually means it's limited to X if I wanted to. And he totally got away with this, because nobody ever thinks to challenge this kind of ruling. So, constitutions are just useless for actually getting anything done, but they're actually good as historical reminders of what it was we were trying to do once upon a time. In a sense, you can go back and look at a constitution as a way to ask, why were we cutting off the end of that roast again? So if we look at, say, the New Hampshire Constitution, Part 1, Article 8, which is my favorite part, it basically says you can't delegate a power that you don't have, right? And so in short, it says if you can hire somebody to do something for you, you can't elect them to do it either. So in Part 1, which comes with Part 1, Section 1, it basically says all government's founded in consent. And again, this sort of echoes the same idea. I cannot consent for somebody to take your money any more than I can consent for somebody to take your kidney. That's something you have to do, okay? And so if you take these at face value, these two things together, what it really says is the community can't tax you at all without your consent, your individual consent. Problem with that is it's, what's that word they use in the legislature all the time? Oh, inexpedient. Okay, so if we look at Part 1, Article 3, it says, just to paraphrase, it says that the government can't tax you, but when it does it anyway, it can only do it for specific purposes, and in particular, it can only do it, it can only violate your right to property if it's protecting your other rights. Okay, and this is argued in, it's echoed in Article 12, right? That essentially, you have the right to be protected by your community, and you have to pay for it. So it's pretty much like with the Gambino family, right? They protect you, you pay them. Even if what you're mostly being protected against is them. And so in Article 10, we actually see a really crucial distinction being made between common benefit and private enrichment, okay? And so if you put all these things together, this right is also echoed in Article 12, which is specifically about eminent domain of property, but the principle is the same. You can't take somebody's property to give it to somebody else just to make their life better. So, to sum up, what the Constitution is telling us, again, not that anybody's going to pay attention to this, not that anybody's going to feel bound by this, but as a reminder, the community can't really legitimately tax you, but if it does, it has to be for the purpose of protecting everyone, and not for the purpose of improving the quality of life of individual people. And I think this is a key to thinking about why we can use taxes for education and how we would go about doing that. So if we accept this as the case, we have to ask, what is it that we need to be protected from exactly? And this guy's thoughts are sort of, one possible view of that we need to be protected against illiteracy, innumeracy, and irrationality, the 3 I's. And so if we think, okay, barbarians are at the gate, or since we don't have a gate, we have a port. So suppose barbarians are at the port, they're about to rush into New Hampshire. Even a lot of libertarians at that point might say, you know what? This might be a good time to tax people to mounted dividends. A lot wouldn't, some would, the kinds who still say, yeah, we gotta build roads. But here's a question. What is a greater threat than an annual flood of newly minted graduates who can't read or write fluently in their own native language, who can't do basic calculations, and follow basic instructions, or reason through a problem, do troubleshooting, and can't tell when they're being lied to? That's a politician's dream, and it's a free state's nightmare, or a free society's nightmare. And then we can ask, well, doesn't it help if some of these guys learn to play the trombone, or cook an omelet, or sew an apron, or speak a little French, or play basketball? And I think if you think about it, you realize it really doesn't. And so if we consider a different idea about education, right, we could start by asking, well, what is so special and so necessary about people who can read, write, calculate, and think? And the answer is, it's harder to lie to them. It's harder to mislead them. It's harder to jerk them around like trout and make them go where you want them to. So one way to think about a defensive curriculum is we could actually be guided by a primary focus on lie detection. And so in my little fantasies, I imagine not so much that there's a particular way to teach it, but when you're ready to demonstrate that you've mastered this and be released into society as an adult, we have a final exam. The final exam looks like this. Here's a big pile of stuff. Some of it's advertising, some of it's judicial opinions, some of it's lots of cases where people are basically trying to mislead you. They're lying, or they're shading the facts, or they're relying on certain things that people just are really bad at, like statistical arguments, okay? And your job is to find where they're jerking you around, explain how they're jerking you around, and then say what you're going to do about it. Okay, so a lot of people, when you talk about assessment, there's this fear of oh my God, if we have tests, we'll just teach the test. Okay, teach to that test, I dare you. Okay? So then you can imagine if you actually had something like that, you'd have a state full of citizens who could, recognize that inflation is a tax on savings, right? They could catch a judge when he's trying to redefine a word like and or not to get a particular result. They could identify a Ponzi scheme when they're being told that it's just an insurance program, okay? That is a politician's nightmare and a free society's dream. So in the context of education, one way to look at this is to say, you know what? Tax money can be spent only to protect society from illiteracy, innumeracy, irrationality. And if we take this idea seriously, it tells us something really important. It tells us where we can draw the line between what counts as public benefit and what counts as private enrichment. So what's kind of interesting is we started by revisiting the question of why we're doing this in the first place. And we got some insight into what it is we could or should or shouldn't be doing. And in particular, we can use this as a way of pruning back the current curriculum. So this table, the way you can read it is basically, would you say that someone suffers from this symptom if he lacks this cure? So if somebody can't read or write, would you say he's illiterate? Yeah, you would. It's practically the definition. If somebody can't follow or construct a logical argument, would you say he's irrational? Yeah, you would. If he can't do any math to speak of, would you say he's enumerate? Yeah. And science in the modern world is, I would put it under irrationality, and if you don't understand scientific reasoning, then you're at a huge handicap in trying to understand much of what's going on around you. So then we can look at some other things like French. If you can't speak French, are you illiterate? No. Illiterate? No. Irrational? No. How about if you don't know anything about Egyptian history? No. Music, sports, play the trombone, play football? No. None of this is protecting anybody from anything. And so what's kind of cool about this way of looking at it is it creates natural limits, okay? And so you get a way to actually draw this line and say, what should we all be paying for, if anything, versus what should we definitely not be paying for? And you can contrast this with the current procedure for doing this, which is basically to have people who are on school boards or superintendents or whatever saying, oh gosh, it'd really be nice if kids could do this or this or this. Let's do it. So, one of my favorite quotes is from Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, because, I went to public school. Perfection is achieved, not when there's nothing more to add, but when there's nothing left to take away. And so I look at these two things, and on the left we have the current public school curriculum. And what could you not add to that? Right? Somebody could sneak into a museum and put anything on that thing, and people would come back the next day and go, it's about the same. On the other hand, try to take something away from the Statue of David. Anything you do to it would make it worse. So, as a way of thinking about curriculum, instead of always adding and saying, is that enough? Is that enough? Because you know what? When it's basically taking money from people, it's never going to be enough. We would do better to say, cut. Have we gone far enough? Okay? To put it another way, we should really be chiseling our curricula out of stone rather than slapping them together out of clay. So as I've been saying all along, specificity can really help, okay? So even within, say, mathematics, mathematics covers a lot of ground. And, so arithmetic, yeah. Are we harmed if people don't really know how to do arithmetic? Yeah, they are. We basically have to take care of them. Algebra, there's some disagreement, but statistics for sure, that includes algebra. I know I work on a Mac, that's a PC. Sorry about that. I hope you...
You should have statistics goes under the numeracy and the irrationality.
You're right.
Because if somebody uses an antidote for...
You are absolutely right. So fortunately, you only need one check mark to get included, but you're absolutely right. That's a really good point. Calculus, there's lots of people running around who don't know calculus, and it'd be nice for everybody to do it, but it's not really hurting us. Topology, that's mostly for fun. So even within science, there's the kind of basic physics you need to understand why you shouldn't tailgate at 70 miles an hour. And then there's quarks and strings. And some of that is actually protecting us, and it hurts us if people don't know it, and the rest of it is just fun, right? So that can be a big help. And one of the things that will happen is, you'll find that there are things where there is some disagreement, right? Like American history. So you can imagine some people going, and in fact, it's in the statutes in New Hampshire that you must teach American history, right? It is. It's part of what it counts as an education. So you have to do this stuff. You can say, well, they can't really participate in discussions, blah, blah, blah. And so you can say, maybe, maybe not. But here's the thing. Any place where we would find a question mark, that is exactly where politics creeps into education. That is the hole in the condom, so to speak. Because if you look at something like American history or the federal and state constitutions, which are also required to teach in New Hampshire, who can actually be trusted to provide the correct description of American history or how the Constitution should or shouldn't work? Who knows? But we can say one thing for sure: whoever happens to be in power at the moment should not be teaching that. Okay? And this kind of leads to a principle and a corollary. If there's significant controversy about whether something should be included, whether taxes should be paying for it, you shouldn't do it, because that, by definition, is where people are using political influence to try to change what's being taught. And that's one of the most destructive choke points to have on any society, is if you get to teach kids what you're claiming is true. That's dangerous. So as a corollary to that, though, if something isn't important enough to be mandatory, we shouldn't really be using taxes to teach it. You know, if it's not important enough that everybody has to know this, then you know what, that's optional. So, but here's the good news about these kinds of subjects, whether it's the Second Amendment or the theory of evolution or whatever it is that people want to fight about. If kids can read and write and calculate and think, you don't really have to have classes for these subjects. They can learn it on their own. There's libraries. There's this thing called the internet, where basically you can look up just about anything, including getting free textbooks and free educational materials on virtually anything. And I think this is important because I think it's easy. An easy criticism here is to go, oh my God, you don't want the kids to learn about art and history and culture. You just want to be little corporate drones, right? Which is not really what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying certain things shouldn't be taught at public expense. And that's particularly true, seeing how expensive these have become, right? $2,000 a kid, 25 kids, $50,000 for some history class, right? You can get a better teacher doing a better job for $40. Or you could just go to the Yale website and it's free, okay? So this idea that you should be teaching this, what you need are kids who can take advantage of these things, not to actually sit them down and read the materials to them. So I will also say, having said that it's a frequent topic of conversation, especially around education, that we want to attract employers to the state. Employers need to know that if they move here, they'll be able to find the right kind of people to work for them. And so, you know, I imagine myself, I'm an employer. Do I care if somebody can read and write? Oh, yeah. Do I care if they can I can give them a manual, or if something goes wrong, that they can figure out what's going on and fix it? Yeah, I care about that. Do I care if they play the trombone? Not so much. Do I care if they speak German? You know, unless I'm in the translation business. No, I don't. And so to have a less expansive and more focused curriculum would actually go in this direction without making the kids corporate drones, because again, we're teaching them to read, write, calculate, and think, which means they're harder to control rather than easier to control, okay? So again, revisiting the question of why gives us insight into what, and so I would then ask, can we go farther? And I think we can, and this is where it gets really interesting to me. So, what might be called this defensive curriculum, to learn this would not require students to be locked away for 8 hours a day, 180 days a year for 12 years, okay? In fact, you know, it might turn out to be the case, just to make some numbers up, maybe it takes 3 hours a day, 3 days a week for 8 years, okay? Some would need more time than that, some would need less. But this would raise a crucial question. What are we going to do with all the kids who are now not locked away, okay? And you would think, okay, wait, isn't this for their parents to figure out? But it's asking questions like this that allows us to start dragging things back out of the umbrella, one object at a time, to drag it out in the sun, open it up, talk about it using the words that are appropriate to it, that are very specific and meaningful, and then decide on their own merits whether and how they might be funded, okay? And so in this particular case, the more we pare down what has to be learned, right, towards its essential protective mission, the harder it is to justify keeping kids locked away for what amounts to a prison sentence, and the harder it becomes to deny that much of what actually we're paying for under school is daycare, okay? Now, if you wanted to get the New Hampshire State Supreme Court to go back and look at the Constitution and find, oh my God, look, we discovered a right to daycare, there's only so much you can do about that. And so just by using specific meaningful terms in place of these vague umbrella terms, a conversation that used to look like this, where you had two people essentially saying something very vague and blathery and thinking they agreed when they really couldn't be farther apart, we now get conversations that sound like this, okay? I was frightened. What? No, okay? So there are lots of topics that need to be discussed, things like how subsidized is different from free, which is a thing that people don't actually think about very much. How using age and class time as metrics actually can work against us and do more harm than good. How obsolete ideas about resource scarcity, which prompted the formation of schools, might actually be taking us in the wrong direction. Whether truancy is even a sensible concept anymore. How much of special education spending protects society and how much harms it? And the benefits of changing maybe public school from an entitlement to a means-tested welfare program, and so on and so on. There are lots of conversations. And my point is, I don't have time to go into all these right now. I'll be at the school choice dinner following Joe around if anybody wants to come and talk about this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's important to realize what I'm saying is not that I have the answers to this. All I'm saying is that until we develop the habits of calling things by the right names, of asking the right kinds of questions, and always going back to first principles to think about why we're doing this, we can't even hope to have discussions that are going to be anything more than people just going into hysterics. More specifically, without the vocabulary of public benefit versus private enrichment, and without the habit of posing our questions, like the Undertaker, so that they have very natural limits, rather than just being answers that are open-ended and can grow forever, if we don't do those things, we're going to keep doing what we've been doing, and we're going to keep getting what we've been getting. So, you might ask, okay, so what am I hoping for, right? Do I think we're all going to storm the State House next year and change all this stuff? No, I don't. I agree with Milton Friedman that until there's a real crisis, nothing's going to happen. But I also agree with him that it's an important function to have ideas, alternatives to what you're doing now so that when things do fall apart, I like his phrase, until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. At that point, I would like for this idea, this vocabulary to be out there, so it's one of the things that people might pick up, and when they try to reassemble this broken system, this could happen. It's going to happen in 2 years, probably not 4 years. It kind of depends on how fast that curve rises and how quickly we run out of money. So, for me, it really just comes down to this. Again, asking the right questions, using the right words, always starting from first principles. And so starting from things like, what is it that we actually believe, right? And what are we trying to accomplish? And how can we do what we're trying to do while still being true to what we believe? Those are questions that aren't very popular. It's much easier to just run off and go, oh, here's a tweak we could make, here's a thing we could do, why don't we try that? And so really what I'm talking about is having better discussions, which, to go back to Confucius, when you start doing that, that's the first step towards actual wisdom instead of some kind of, running around like chickens with their heads cut off. The alternative to this is, as they say, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. So I want to close with something that President Kennedy said at his inauguration. Ask not what we can do for your children, ask what your children can do for us. So, did he not say that? Because I found this on the internet, so I'm pretty sure. Anyways, I don't know if he said it or not. What he should have said was this: ask not what we can teach, what we can teach children. Ask what, if not learned by children, will cause the rest of us harm. And ask how we can assist those children whose parents can't afford to help them learn these things, without confusing maturity with age, or learning with being taught, or progress made with time spent, without conflating public benefit and private enrichment, and without requiring those who have less to subsidize those who have more. Because I think that actually is a libertarian, palatable way to use taxes to avoid the dangers of an uneducated populace. Thank you. It's 3:09. I don't know what.
You have 10 minutes. Yeah.
10 minutes. Does anybody have any questions? No?
I'm speechless.
Okay. Either it's really good or really bad. So thank you.
Just wait. Yeah.
Okay, great. No, you're right. Take your questions. Take your time. Anybody who wants can get. I can just send you the slides. By the way, that's a good address. Ian@bardofarm.com, and I will just send you the slides.
A lot to take in.
Yeah, take your time. Right, it was kind of a flood.
Yes.
But I only do this once a year. Yes.
So what are the options in New Hampshire now for somebody who doesn't want to send their kid to like public school, but they can't afford to like homeschool them full time, so they can't afford to stay home all day and look after them? What are my options?
What are their options? I mean, there are people like Jody or Marab who would be better able to answer that than me, but one of the things you can do, one of the things that I hate is the word homeschool, because I think it sends completely the wrong message. And I think it's one of the things, if I were more politically active, one of the things I'd be trying to do is get people to just stop using that word, okay? Because it's one of the things right now, I believe there's a bill where the state is trying to impose more control over homeschoolers. Well, why are they doing that? Partly because it's like, well, we have schools, you're schooling at home, we should be controlling what you're doing. I prefer the term parent-directed education, okay? Because here's the thing, you don't have to school your own kid. You don't have to do it at home. You could get together with other parents. You could get together like in the Old West, right? You get 6 parents, you hire a tutor. He comes in, he teaches your kids, right? Or you take, the homeschooling here, until they screw it up, is actually pretty wide open as I understand it. You have to just tell them one time, I'm homeschooling my kid, that's it, butt out. And if you do that, then whatever options you can dream up are available to you. And the more people who are doing that, the more options will get dreamed up as there's more opportunity. So I think this is one of these market questions where it's like, you don't already know the answer, but you start doing it knowing, that, yeah, there's no safety net there, but by the time we get there, there will be one, okay? So I don't know if that's the kind of answer you were looking for, but.
I was thinking of something like more specific, because I've got a friend who's in trouble and I want to like give her some advice on things she can do with the kids, but something very specific, not necessarily theory. Because
right, okay, so for example, what kind of trouble are they in?
Well, I don't want to do too much,
okay.
But her kid is in a lot of trouble in the school system.
Okay, so you
I wanted to say, hey, New Hampshire's like a better alternative for these reasons, but not libertarian theory reasons, because she wanted to accept that stuff.
Right, so there are lots of private schools, like in Croydon, a lot of kids go to a Montessori school, they love it, the parents love it, it's very individualistic. I think Marab has had experience with like Waldorf schooling. There are lots of other ways. Charter schools, there are charter schools and there's more every year. So those things are being set up directly as alternatives to what's normally going on.
But if the kid is having a particular problem in a particular school and the school isn't doing anything about it, then the parents can file something called manifest educational hardship to have the districts actually pay for the tuition in a different school. That sounds like, without knowing any more details, that would be what I would advise.
Jody, the district doesn't pay for it, the taxpayer does.
Correct. Through the district. But yes, I apologize. Hard to speak things, I know,
Right.
I'm sorry.
The Gambinos get the money and then they
Yes.
hand it over. So, anyways, it's the kind of thing, there are lots of people you can talk to about this. I'm probably not the most knowledgeable person.
I would love to talk to you about it.
Okay, right. Emily Smith
Yeah.
would talk to you about it. So yeah, but I'm not that expert. Yes?
So, you talk about the 4 I's. This is like three I's. This is, I would say, minimum tools for life. Right? But what do you do with a child who's not interested?
Well, so my view of modern education is, education and schooling used to be about conserving resources, right? We're living out on the prairie, you're living out on the farm someplace, books are expensive, chalkboards are expensive, everybody's working, nobody has time to, just deal with the kids. That's not the case anymore, okay? The resources are nearly free. And so my view is, much of education now is really a sales job, right? Your job as an educator is to convince the kids, however you have to do that this is in their best interest. So, what was it? Sometimes, like I had a friend who ended up going to Yale, and one of the reasons he went to Yale is his dad made him work at McDonald's. Okay, he said this is the kind of thing that you do if you don't get a good education. So there are ways to motivate kids, but I think that is actually more the central problem right now, because I think people who have kids or who deal with kids know that once a kid decides he wants someone or something, it's mostly a matter of getting out of the way and occasionally steering them away from crashes. So, that is a problem, but I don't think it's, if you can sell them on this thing, right? And there are also ways that if you, whatever the kid likes, there are always ways to sort of steer that back and show that, like, you know what, if you like cars, you like Pokemon, whatever, you're going to be able to do more with it if you can read and get on the internet and write to other people and talk about it, okay? And if you are going to buy these things, you're going to be a lot happier if you're not one of those people who's always getting suckered by other people because they know how to sell stuff to you and you don't know what's going on.
So even with those 3 eyes, it's completely individualized. You say it has to be individualized to a particular child at a particular time. There's no...
Okay, so I'm not, when I say curriculum, it's a bad word and I don't have a better one yet. If somebody has a suggestion, that would be great. What I mean is more the end product. I'm not saying everybody should take the same path up the mountain. Obviously they shouldn't, and there are kids who should learn the stuff in different order. What I'm more interested in is that at some point, they all get to the same final point, which is they should all be able to explain to you how people lie to you. Okay, there's really a fixed number of ways to do that, and I don't care if you learn them at age 10 or at age 26. You really need to know those things. If they learn, if they get really interested in science, and then they discover, God, I'll understand the science better if I learn a little more math, and then they learn a little more math, and that leads them to the history of math, and they start, whatever they're interested in, right? And I'm not saying everybody should march in lockstep, that there is one way to teach this stuff. There's as many ways to teach it as there are kids. What I am saying is, find a million ways to teach statistics. And you know what? Maybe if that's what we need, it's a reasonable thing to say we should be paying for it. I don't want to pay for even one way to teach the trombone. That's really the point. Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm struggling with resources and how, basically you say one adult per one student type of situation. You don't really say that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it could be kids getting together. Again, one of the things that I think people don't realize is it's sort of obscene that you get to high school level and you essentially have teachers reading the books to the students. I just find that unbelievable. At that level, if they've been taught properly and they can actually do the reading and have the discussions, you could have 200 kids from one teacher. Because it's mostly read the book. If you're confused, go talk to your other students, and if you're still confused, come talk to me. Okay? So, again, I don't want to make the suggestion that there's like, here's the book, everybody go through this book in this order, because that's obviously insane. Okay? What I am saying is, I want to look at the end result and say, we are all, I think, interested in having people who, seriously, you go to Burger King and there's a kid, and he's trying to make a hamburger, he's got a poster explaining to him he still can't do it right. Okay? We can't afford that. Okay? And it's not, you might be a perfectly charming person and be able to do some very nice things, but if you're an employer, if you're a citizen worried about politicians selling that guy on some crazy, disguised income tax, for example, you can't afford that. So that's really what I'm saying. I'm not making curriculum. I'm not making any arguments about the order in which anybody learns, the materials you use, or any of that. I'm just saying there's a difference between what we need to pay for and what we don't. And this is a way to think about it. Yes?
I don't know whether this is when I'm school board president, somebody part of the reaction is the reaction and concern that against what they believe is common for criminalization. The issue is, the answer to your question is, if you're going to do this in any subject, find whatever works for each kid within your constraints and resources. And you said it actually multiple times.
Yeah, I'm not talking about how you teach things. I'm talking about what you teach.
So it's really, and there may be an attitude in schools that shirk Because the easiest thing to do is have them teach the same thing to everybody. That's human nature, is to slide to the bottom effort. And that's a disaster.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of those methods are reactions. They're basically living as if it's 1790, and it's not 1790. It's not even 1990. You know, I mean, the world's changed, and to solve a problem that doesn't exist, you know, I guess there's another thing I believe, which is the right answer to the wrong question is still the wrong answer. So if our question is essentially, if all our systems are built on this idea of conserving resources, and that's not a problem, then nothing really is going to go well. So, okay, so I guess we're done. Thank you very much.